week 9 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few players I look to stash before they break out or before these players get more playing time. And you got to waste fab money or waiver claim on these players. The first player, Xavier Legette of the Carolina Panthers. Legette right now looking like the number one wide receiver over there for this Carolina Panther team. He's out there still in tons of fantasy leagues at 78%. And we've definitely seen some flashes from Legette this season. 3 games with double-digit fantasy points. And now with Deontay Johnson traded away to the Baltimore Ravens, I think Legette is going to step in, become the number one wide receiver where there's not much competition, honestly. Jonathan Mingo, who hasn't shown much first couple years in the league. Jalen Coker, who's starting to get things going. He had a nice game last week. But Legette definitely going to be a number 1 or 2 wide receiver. And it wouldn't be surprising to me if Adam Thielen's traded before the NFL trade deadline to a team. So week 6 versus Atlanta, 3 catches, 23 yards, a touchdown. Week 7 at the Commanders, an off game, 2 catches, 3 yards, a carry, 6 yards. And week 8 at the Denver Broncos, I know it was garbage time, but 4 catches, 34 yards, and a touchdown. So he was a first-round pick in the NFL draft this season, Xavier Legette. Bryce Young, Andy Dalton, it doesn't really matter. He's going to be the number 1 or 2 wide out. And this is just going to be a lot of garbage time this season for Legette and the Panthers the rest of the way. So this week, a decent matchup versus the Saints that give up the 7th most fantasy points. If you want to stash them right now, this would be the perfect time. Next player, Calvin Austin of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So you could get him off the waiver wire easily right now. Available in 99% of fantasy leagues. And he had a big breakout game in week 8 versus the Giants. 3 catches, 54 yards, a touchdown, and also return touchdown as well in that ball game. So right now the Steelers on bye. They come back in a matchup at Washington. Defense isn't great. Baltimore at Cleveland. So this Pittsburgh Steelers team arguably could go out there and make a deal for a wide receiver because behind George Pickens they don't have consistency. But Calvin Austin, like I said, he's got breakaway speed. We always knew Russell Wilson likes those speedy and underneath wide receivers like a Tyler Lockett. Made a career off that with Wilson going back years ago. And I think Calvin Austin could play maybe a similar type of role, even though he's a smaller type of wide receiver than a Tyler Lockett. But in terms of speed and route running, I think he's a little familiar to what Tyler Lockett's. So Calvin Austin, like I said, he could be a breakout candidate. And we saw last week the plays he can make in special teams and catching the football. Next player, Elijah Moore of the Cleveland Browns. Moore out there in tons of fantasy leagues still. And I arguably could say he could be the number 1 wide receiver. Him, Tillman, or Jerry Jeudy, but all these guys are producing so far with Winston in the lineup over the last couple of weeks. So Moore out there in 89% of fantasy leagues. In the last 2 weeks, week 7 versus the Bengals, 6 catches, 41 yards. And week 8 versus the Ravens, 8 catches, 85 yards. I know after this week it's a bye week in week 10 for Elijah Moore and this Cleveland Brown team. But let's say he goes out there and has another 70, 80-yard performance and finds the end zone. He's going to be someone you're going to want to keep on your roster because 12 targets is a tough thing to come by. And I don't think it's that fluky because the last 2 games with Winston in the lineup, 18 targets for Elijah Moore. So right now, if you want to make the move and get him on the wire, like I said, he's out there in 89% of fantasy leagues. Next player, Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers. So with Brandon Ayuk out for the season, Deebo Samuel still banged up, not 100%, and Jawan Jennings banged up as well. Ricky Pearsall's operating pretty much as the number 2 wide receiver and still getting his legs under him after getting shot in the offseason and still picking up the playbook. But right now out there in 69% of fantasy leagues. In the last 2 weeks where he got opportunity, week 7 versus the Chiefs, 3 catches, 21 yards. And week 8 versus the Cowboys, a well-rounded game, a carry, 39 yards on an end around, and 4 catches, 38 yards. So he's got breakaway speed. He was a first-round pick for a reason, and he's definitely someone after the bye week where I say this all the time in my videos. Rookies usually get into the playbook more after the bye week, and the coaches have more trust in them, and they get on the field more. So with Brandon Ayuk out for the season, that number 2 wide receiver spot, in my opinion, is wide open for PSL to take. Next player, his teammate, Isaac Gendo of the San Francisco 49ers. So I know it looks like Christian McCaffrey's going to return to the lineup in Week 10's ball game. But Gendo, he's very impressive, and he's one of the quicker running backs to come out of college football in the last few seasons, where his speed's in the 1 percentile is Isaac Gendo. So the last few games where he gotten some opportunity, Week 6 at Seattle, we saw Mason leave that game with the shoulder, 10 carries, 99 yards, and he slid right before the goal line, or he would have had a bigger ball game. And then Week 8 versus the Cowboys, he played pretty much from the mid-second quarter on, 14 carries 85 yards. Found the end zone in that one, 3 catches, 17 yards. So I think Gendo, 4th-round pick in the season's NFL draft. He's got the total package. He could catch the football out of the backfield. Big physical back in between the tackles. And he could block as well as Gendo. But like I said, Christian McCaffrey, reports are coming out. He's going to come back in week 10. But I believe he's not going to get a full workload. And Jordan Mason, we just don't know how bad that shoulder is because he's aggravated it 2 times in the last 3 ball games. So with all those factors, I think Gendo, just someone to take a flyer on, and you never know, to see how the running back position shakes out over there in San Francisco. He's available in 83% of fantasy leagues. Next is Ray Davis of the Buffalo Bills. So Ray Davis right now, he's out there in tons of fantasy leagues at 78%. Obviously, James Cook's been one of the best backs in all fantasy football, but it just takes one injury for Ray Davis to come in and become the starting running back for this Buffalo Bill team. So with not many great handcuffs on the waiver wire, and like I said, Davis out there in 78% of fantasy leagues. If you have an open roster spot, I believe this will be the time to go out there and put him on your roster. So week 6 at the Jets, where he got the start, 20 carries, 97 yards, 3 catches, 55 yards. Week 7 versus Tennessee, 5 carries, 41 yards, a touchdown, the catch 6 yards in garbage time. And week 8 at Seattle, 6 carries, 29 yards. So like I said, if you just need to take a flyer on someone and maybe something happens in this game where Ray Davis emerges, or God forbid something happens to James Cook, you have top 15, top 20 option weekly, I believe Ray Davis could be if James Cook went out with injury. So right now, he's definitely a stash on the waiver wire this week. And the final player I look to stash is Joe Flaco of the Indianapolis. Joe Flaco is going to be the quarterback for the foreseeable future right now for this Colts team, where Anthony Richardson's been a big bust and a disappointment. And now the Indianapolis Colts want him to sit on the bench and learn things, and they think they got the best chance of winning with Joe Flaco. And I said that weeks ago, that Flaco was putting up big numbers, and then this whole offense was better. Michael Pittman was putting up big games. Josh Downs was putting up big games. Alec Pierce. And now Flaco out there in 90% of fantasy leagues, and the games he started, he had some nice performances. Week 4 versus Pittsburgh, he came in early in the first quarter when Richardson went down. 168 pass yards, 2 touchdowns. Week 5 at Jacksonville, 359 passing, 3 touchdowns, a fumble loss, 22 yards rushing. And week 6 at Tennessee, 189 pass yards and 2 touchdowns and an interception. So right now, back in the lineup is Joe Flaco. This week, I know it's a tougher matchup in Minnesota. Then he's got Buffalo and the Jets. So definitely tougher matchups coming up. But I feel like Joe Flacco's that quarterback at 39 years old that goes out there, still has a big arm. He picks up any offense, and he still competes and put points on the board. And we saw it so far this season in the 3 games where he got a good look as Flaco when Richardson was out. So right now, if you need quarterback help, and Joe Flaco, he don't have a bye week to week 14, even though there's some tougher matchups, I think he's a decent stash this week. So that's a few plays I'd look to stash for week 9 of the fantasy football season.